Hello, bonjour, welcome, bienvenue. Alors aujourd'hui, on se rencontre pour, vous avez reçu l'ordre du jour et on rencontre Madame Heather Lank au poste de bibliothécaire parlementaire. Aujourd'hui, pour l'instant, il y a 8 personnes. Ordinairement, on a 5 minutes par question. Alors, vous avez la possibilité.
Usually we have 5 minutes per question, but if we have more people that want to ask questions than we have time for, then I might have to reduce the time for your questions and answers so that everyone has the time to ask questions. But we will deal with that if the situation arises. So Ms. Lank, who has been nominated to the position of parliamentary librarian, do you have any comments to make before we start with questions? Thank you very much to all members of the committee, to the two co-chairs.
For you as the nominee to become the next parliamentary librarian. I am honored to be here and to be considered for this position. I feel that I've been preparing for this job for the last 30 years, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to tell you about my background, how I believe it has prepared me for this challenge, and to answer any questions you might have. I would be thrilled to be the successor to Madame L'Heureux, who has so ably led the library since 2012.
You will know from my CV that I obtained my master's and doctorate in sociology from the University of Toronto, where I developed a deep appreciation for the importance of quality research and analysis, as well as the value of library resources. I began my career on Parliament Hill as a committee clerk in 1991, where I worked closely with analysts from the library to provide non-partisan professional support to many standing and special committees. I quickly came to appreciate the importance of the work of the library, and once I was promoted to management in 1997, I worked closely with my library colleagues to ensure that committees received the best support possible. Working with committees gave me a deep understanding of the needs of parliamentarians to be effective in their work, as well as a keen appreciation for the multiplicity of stakeholders in the parliamentary environment, including witnesses, government departments, and interested members of the public. As principal clerk of committees from 1999 to 2015, I led a team of procedural clerks and other employees supporting some 20 committees, while also being deeply involved in strategic and corporate files, both within the Senate administration and in support of the Committee on Internal Economy, Budgets and Administration. In 2015, I became the principal clerk of the Chamber Operations and Procedure Office. In this capacity, I am responsible for the administrative, procedural, and informational support to sittings of the Senate, as well as providing procedural advice to the Speaker of the Senate, all other senators, and their staff. I am also responsible for the production and publication of the official records of the Senate, including the journals and the debates in digital and hard copy in both official languages. I have led the Directorate through technological and organizational transformation, developing and implementing a new information system which supports legislative functions in the Senate. The creation, capture, and management of parliamentary information are an essential part of my current responsibilities, and the skills required to be effective in my current job would serve me well should I become the next parliamentary librarian. In both committees and chamber operations, outreach and education have been at the core of my work. I, along with members of my team, have developed and offered procedural training seminars to parliamentarians and their staff on a wide variety of topics over the last 20 years. I have also reached out to the Library and the House of Commons, as well as to parliamentary relations officers in the public service to invite them to our seminars, as I believe profoundly in the value of sharing knowledge, collaboration, and learning from one another. I have developed numerous educational and training tools, many in collaboration with the Library of Parliament. For over a decade, I have been a parliamentary advisor to one of the library's flagship programs, the Teachers Institute for Canadian Parliamentary Democracy. And in that capacity, I worked closely with my library colleagues to develop and deliver the committee simulation that wraps up this program. I have been very fortunate to be able to share my knowledge of Parliament with colleagues across the country, foreign legislators, and many groups of all ages who come to the Hill. It would be a true pleasure to lead an organization that has education and outreach as a core function.
Has prepared me for the position for which I've been nominated in 3 key ways. First, I have a deep knowledge and understanding of the clients of the library, including parliamentarians, committees, and parliamentary associations. I understand that clients have different needs and ways that they prefer to be served, and that the library must be flexible in meeting those needs. Second, I understand the parliamentary environment in all its complexity. I appreciate where the library fits into that environment, directed by the 2 speakers, advised by this committee, and serving both houses in a nonpartisan way. I am cognizant of the many important relationships that the parliamentary librarian must develop and sustain to be effective, including with the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Parliamentary Protective Service, Public Services and Procurement Canada, and, of course, the Senate and the House of Commons. Throughout my career, I have looked for ways to collaborate with many partners on and off the Hill, and I would build on these relationships and continue to work in a collaborative way in my new role. Third, as a leader and as a manager, I have had the privilege of working with and developing agile, innovative, and effective teams to support Parliament. I have spent my career working with and for parliamentarians of all political parties and groups, developing relationships of trust and providing nonpartisan, professional support, and I would look forward to working with the members of this committee and all parliamentarians if I am confirmed in this position. I have huge respect for the library, its executive team, and its employees, and I would be committed to continuing to build flexible, engaged, professional teams with a focus on excellence, all qualities that I know are essential to the success of the library. The organization will be faced with many challenges during the coming year and thereafter, including the closure of Centre Block and the library's iconic main branch, and the opening of new branches in the West Block and the Government Conference Centre. The Visitors Welcome Centre will open and the tours will have to be reconceived as Canadians will no longer have physical access to Centre Block. I know that Madame L'Heureux and her team have already done a great deal to prepare for these changes, and I would look forward to working with my colleagues at the library to ensure that Canadians and visitors from around the world continue to have memorable experiences when they come to both the Senate and the House of Commons in their new buildings. Of course, it is service to parliamentarians that is at the very heart of the library's mandate, and my professional experience has prepared me well to lead the organization in meeting your needs and those of committees and parliamentary associations. I have always made consultations with parliamentarians central to my work. For example, by getting regular input from committee chairs and deputy chairs on how to improve services, and reaching out to new parliamentarians to identify their needs and provide the information, training, and tools they require to be effective in their roles. If I am confirmed as parliamentary librarian, I would look forward to working with you and both speakers to ensure that the needs of all parliamentarians are well understood and met. I would also make it a priority to reach out across the country in all its diversity so that the Library of Parliament becomes better known to Canada's best and brightest as a place they might want to work. I know that the library has outstanding employees who are deeply committed to serving Parliament, parliamentarians, and the public. I would like energetic and engaged subject matter experts, librarians, and other professionals from a variety of backgrounds to know that the Library of Parliament is a dynamic, healthy workplace where they can have exciting, rewarding careers in the service of Canada. It would truly be a great honour and privilege to become the next parliamentary librarian, to work with its executive team to lead the outstanding professionals who make such an important contribution to Canada by supporting you and our Parliament. I look forward to your questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So we will now go to questions. I am going to reduce the time since we have other members who have come to join us, and so I am going to give each person 3.5 minutes, and we will see how that works out so that everyone has a chance to ask your questions. The first person on the list is Senator Mercer.
Chair and Dr. Lank, congratulations for your nomination. And I should say on behalf of my Senate colleagues, we will miss you in the Senate, and I will miss you in our daily meetings at the scroll meetings, which you ably chair. So thank you for that. Simple question. I've been very critical of this committee over the past number of years because of its lack of activity and its lack of involvement in assisting and managing the library. Can you give me a quick capsule of what you see the role of the committee in helping you as the librarian?
Thank you very much, Senator Mercer, for the question. As you know, from a legislative point of view, this committee is in place to advise the speakers. But of course, it is a fantastic forum for me to have the possibility of consulting with you as parliamentarians about your needs. Are we meeting your needs? If I have ideas that I want to explore with you. I was so pleased to see that this committee was organized recently because I had put my name forward for this job, hoping that if it came to pass that this committee would be available and interested to have that relationship with me so that I would be able to serve you and get input from you, and ultimately, of course, be able to bring what I learn to the speakers and really work in collaboration with you. So I see it as an extremely positive forum for me to be able to do my job better, to learn from you, and hopefully be able to meet your needs.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Soroya.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Lankin, for your nomination. What is next? You're the only person nominated. Where do the process take us from here?
Now, I should probably defer to other colleagues in terms of where things go after today's meeting. As you can probably imagine, my focus was much more in getting ready for today's meeting and hoping that I would be able to get the support of this committee so that when you decide on whether or not to support my candidacy, it would be positive, as I hope it will be. But of course, then you would report it back to the House of Commons, and being a joint committee, it would also be a report back normally to the Senate. And if all goes well, I would hope that my nomination would be confirmed, and then I would be in my position at an appropriate date.
Assuming you confirm today, what would you be, one thing you would be known at? What is the unique stuff you bring to this table? This would help both sides of the chambers. Something which hasn't happened in the past. Is there anything unique thing you bring to the table?
I would be loath to say that I bring anything necessarily unique, but of course every candidate for any job is unique. We all bring our own backgrounds, and I do think that my background in terms of understanding Parliament, knowing the needs of parliamentarians, and also having a very strong background in education and outreach is a combination that is quite unique. I have 27 years of experience on the Hill, and I've made it a point to build relationships across the Hill and outside the Hill, so there's a very strong foundation there, but also internationally I've got a network of people that I have benefited from in my current role, and I would continue to build on that collaborative approach. And I think the other thing is, I think I would bring, more than anything else, I think an excitement. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to be nominated for this position and to potentially have the opportunity to lead an organization which is so important to your success. And so I would want to share my excitement about Parliament and about the library with Canadians, with visitors. I have ideas for ways to make that experience of coming to Parliament, even after we've closed, to be particularly memorable. So I think for me, it's a question of just investing in excellence and making this institution even more dynamic and exciting than it already is.
Thank you. Mr. Iacono, please.
Présidente, et merci d'être venu aujourd'hui.
Thank you for being here today to talk a little bit about yourself. Of course, there are big changes that are about to happen, so I would like to understand from you. Now, I have some sub-questions. I will ask them all, and I will give you the time to answer after. So what is your vision for the future of the Library of Parliament? What are you going to emphasize and concentrate on? And, in your opinion, what are the challenges facing the library today and tomorrow? My last question would be, how do you expect to use both official languages and make sure that they are used throughout the Library of Canada, of Parliament, that is through documentation and the workplace and so on? Thank you very much for your questions. With respect to the vision, I touched on that a little bit in my remarks, but I would aim for excellence and to build innovative, strong teams that can support the needs of parliamentarians. My vision is also one in which Canadians would have access to the institution, even though this building is going to be closing. With respect to challenges, they are numerous. We have the renovations that are going to get underway. It will be extremely important to continue to provide service to you. High-quality services need to be provided so that you can have confidence that despite everything happening, we can respond to requests and provide quality information within appropriate timelines so that we can do the work with the tools we need. So I know that the team has already taken steps to prepare for these changes, but because I have not been in the position, I will want to look into those preparations. You asked about official languages. As you know, I come from the Senate administration side, and I work every day in both official languages. This is an essential aspect of my work since I have come to Parliament, and I certainly intend to make sure that both official languages are used in all aspects of the parliamentary librarian's work, and I will continue to work on that. Do I still have some time? 2 seconds. But I just want to make one last remark. I want to thank you and tell you that you master French very well, and I wish you good luck. Mr. Lauzon. Thank you and welcome to Ms. Lank. I'm very impressed by your ability to speak both languages so well. You speak French better than I do.
And it's nice to see. Very few Canadians, only 17% of Canadians are bilingual, and it's nice to see that you're so fluent in both official languages. Just a couple of questions, Ms. Lank. If you could tell me what the budget is for the Library Parliament, the overall budget, the annual budget, and how many FTEs that you'll be managing, and how do you propose to you? First of all, you know, do you have experience in budgets similar to that and managing that type of a workforce, as well as what are your plans once you're in the position? How do you plan to utilize that budget and those FTEs?
Thank you very much for the question. I was reading the transcripts from past meetings to get some of that information and looking at the annual reports. And if my memory serves me correctly, the budget would be in the neighborhood of $48 million this year, with some 330 or so FTEs. That being said, as you are probably aware, in terms of the details of how those resources are currently allocated and where the priorities are, until I'm in the position, I'm really not well positioned to give any real assessment of what would or would not be appropriate on a go-forward basis. I have a lot to learn about how that organization is currently using its resources, and I would want to consult, obviously, with my team and with parliamentarians, too, to see, okay, are we putting the resources in the right place? And do we need to shift or not? And do we have the resources we need? In terms of my experience, you'll know from my CV that I have run significant directorates in the past, but certainly not as large as this institution. You know, I'm somewhere between, depending on where I was working, between 30 and 40 full-time equivalents, budgets $2 to $3 million. I think what's really important, though, is I've had the great privilege of being invited by the Senate to be very much involved in corporate files and in budgetary matters well outside of my own areas of responsibility, both by being asked to be the lead senior manager in terms of the legislative sector on HR and finance files for a number of years, but also being asked to clerk the subcommittee of our Internal Economy Committee on not only committee budgets and the allocation of funds between budgets, which would normally be for budgets, normally an amount between $2 and $4 million a year to be allocated, but also the subcommittee on the Senate estimates, where I was privileged to be the clerk of that and had an opportunity to be involved in supporting the Senate in developing its budget. So it's an area where I feel very comfortable, even though I don't pretend to be a finance expert. I am nonetheless very comfortable in that domain.
Thank you very much.
Choquette.
Well, once again, Ms. Lank, congratulations on your nomination. This is a very important position for us as parliamentarians, but also for Canadians, because they too are benefited by the services of the parliamentary librarians. Not everyone knows that this is a service that helps all Canadians. I also want to congratulate you on your command of both official languages, and I think it is very important that you have that as a priority. You can be a role model and a leader to make sure that services are offered in both official languages. It is certainly the case already, but we want that emphasis maintained. I would like to ask a rather specific question, and you can give a general answer if you like. There's a little bit of a problem right now with digitization in the sense that we have these electronic answers to questions, and we need financial resources to do the work properly at the Library of Parliament. So, of course, we're getting more and more technology involved in the information field. So those that provide the funding need to make sure that the answers on the order paper are available to Canadians electronically. Thank you for your question, Mr. Choquette. I have read that this is an issue that is of great interest to this committee. I have seen that there was a discussion with Ms. Leroux and her team, and I understand, too, that there are discussions between the House of Commons and the Privy Council office on this. So I don't have all the information that I would need to answer you in detail, but I'm well aware that it is important for the library to have the resources that it needs to be able to digitize documents, provide information electronically. This is a major challenge. I don't necessarily have the answer because this is a topic that is under discussion. But my role, and an important one it would be, is to make sure that I can seek and obtain the support of the speakers to obtain the resources you need. Mr. Duffy, Senator Duffy.
And Ms. Lank, it's a delight for all of us from the Senate side to see you here as you're about to take on this new challenge. And I want to assure our friends from the other place, as we call it, that we could not have made a better choice. The Prime Minister should be applauded for his selection of Ms. Lank as the person to be nominated as for this distinguished position of parliamentary librarian. It's a very important role. Two quick questions. One, the question of copyright. I don't expect you will have an answer today, but I wanted to flag for you the fact that at a time when traditional media are dying for lack of revenues, there is a lawsuit against the Library of Parliament for the breach of copyright. And I would urge you to make it a priority that the library get its house in order as it relates to copyright. We have people who generate copyright material who are dying or making a pittance because of abuses of copyright, and I would urge the library to be a leader in that field in observing copyright and protecting the works of our creative artists. And secondly, we even hear it here in the local media where they're talking about a library, a new library for the city of Ottawa. And there are people who talk about libraries are dead, nobody uses them anymore, the internet is the answer. What's your take on the future role of the library and the many things beyond books that you do in the parliamentary library?
Thank you very much, Senator Duffy. In terms of your first point about copyright, certainly that's an area where I will need to become more well-informed, and certainly I've made note of the importance of that. On the second item, I applied for this job in part because I believe that libraries are anything but dead. I think libraries are more important than ever. And because we are overwhelmed with information, there is so much information out there that individuals, be they parliamentarians or Canadians, might have very easy access through Google and other mechanisms to information. But do you know that that information is quality information that you can rely on in a speech when you're meeting with constituents, when you're putting out backgrounders, whatever it might be? The library should be the place that you can come to and say, hey, I need information on this topic, and to know that if the library brings it back to you, you can count on it. And so for me, we're in a world where libraries are more and more important, and I want to be sure that when you have questions in your mind about information and reliability, you come to us and say, hey, is this right? Or I need information on this, and know that if it came from the Library of Parliament, you can count on it. So libraries, absolutely not dead. I think they are the place to be.
Ouellet. Monsieur Ouellet?
Excusez-moi, j'attendais que
I'm sorry. I was just making sure that it was my turn, actually. Thank you, Ms. Lank, for being here with us today. It's a great pleasure for me. Congratulations. I sincerely want to congratulate you on all of your accomplishments in your life, in your work. You have already contributed a great deal in supporting and promoting our great institution and the Library of Parliament. I have a question about something you said in your remarks. You said that you have already had the opportunity to consult with parliamentarians on various issues, and I would like to know what other consultations you would undertake. You mentioned new parliamentarians, new members of Parliament in the House of Commons are consulted. I would like to know how those consultations will be undertaken and what particular topics would be concentrated on. I know that sometimes more academic issues are highlighted, but I would like to know whether more specialized advice and information would be available. So you mentioned consultation, and I would like to know how you plan to go about that. It's one thing to try to hold consultations, but sometimes people don't really participate. And sometimes things are a bit too partisan. Thank you for those questions, Mr. Ouellet. Consultation, and one thing I want to say is that I am not yet in the position, and so I will have to find out about what consultations are already being done, how they are done, and so on. So I don't have all the information that I need on that to answer you. But I think that there are a number of ways to consult people. As a sociologist, I've had a lot of experience in learning about ways to seek information from various sources on many topics. I often find that it is personal contact with parliamentarians, with users. That's where we obtain the information we need. We have a forum right here to use for consultation, but there are many other opportunities as well when you get documents from the Library of Canada, when you deal with, rather, the Parliamentary Library, when you work with the analysts and so on. So all of these are sources of information. I will discuss this with my team to see what the best ways are of obtaining the information. Do we do this through personal contact? Do we put some kind of questionnaire on our document, or other ways? So this is something we need to explore. And as I mentioned in my remarks, this feedback, this contact, all of this is very important, and it is the way that I manage and lead. And if I am confirmed in the position, I will continue to focus on this. Senator Eaton. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The Senate, it has been my great pleasure to work with Heather. She's been absolutely wonderful to me, and very patient and very good and very thorough. My questions, Heather, to you are, there's been a great deal of talk now about preserving Indigenous languages. And I'm wondering, does the library have any kind of vision or role to play in the preservation of Indigenous languages and vocabulary? That's my first question. My second question is, does the library have an acquisition fund for rare Canadian books? Thank you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Sénatrice Eaton.
Thank you very much, Senator Eaton.
And I admit I did not think about it 3:30 in the morning when I was lying in bed anticipating what I might be asked today. So, yeah. So honestly, it's a question I have not thought about, and one that I will reflect on. I don't know what the appropriate role for the library would be in that domain, if there is one, what it would be. I certainly do appreciate the importance of our Indigenous peoples to the country, to Parliament, and the importance of the library integrating that into
well, I was thinking of oral histories, because they perhaps don't have a written tradition, but they have an oral one.
It's a wonderful idea to explore, and certainly one that I would be happy to think about if I'm confirmed in the job, and to talk to my colleagues about as well and get ideas from you. So certainly something that I will make note of for future reflection. In terms of the budget for the acquisition of books, I would love to know the details of the library's budget, and I can assure you that if I am confirmed in the job, one of my first priorities will be to get a detailed briefing on the budget, where the funds are, how they are distributed and why, what the rationale is, and see, are there things that we don't have that we need to get, and are there things that we have budgets for that we don't need? So that's something I would look into.
Do you think, when you do see the budget, do you think that's something we should have, that the most important library in Canada, should it not have an acquisition fund for acquiring rare Canadian books or early publications?
I think it is thank you for the question. I think it is a fascinating and important question to ask, and one of the things, Senator, that I would want to look at is I would want to consult with Library and Archives Canada to see, what is the appropriate forum or organization for those kinds of documents. We want to be sure that we use taxpayers' dollars wisely and make sure that we're not acquiring things that we should not be, but make sure that Canada's history is indeed captured. So that would be something that I would put on the table for discussion with my colleague at Library and Archives Canada, and we'll see how that unfolds.
Ms. Derowitz?
Merci. I want to lend my congratulations on your nomination. My very first job was in a library when I was 14, so I have a very big heart for libraries. The first question I'm going to ask you about is around transparency. One of the things that our government's trying to do is increase transparency, put more documents out for public viewing, giving a better understanding to the public about the work that we do. I believe, my understanding is that there was a discussion and a brief study done in 2014 around digitizing the House of Commons documents, such as petition responses and order paper question responses. And I think that the goal of the study was to see how is it that we can actually make public those documents, so put it on the public website. My understanding is at the end of that study, there was an understanding that that would actually be done by the end of the year, so by the end of 2014, but my understanding is it didn't take place. And I want to know, this is a little unfair to you, just because you're nominated now, not quite in the position, but I want to know whether you might have an understanding of where that's at this moment.
Thank you very much for the question. All I know about it is essentially what was reported to this committee by those who are currently involved in these files, and my understanding is that there are discussions that are ongoing between the Privy Council Office and the House of Commons with respect to whether something can be done to facilitate making those documents public. And certainly it's a file that I'm interested in following, because I'm very interested to find out where this will go. But I certainly, until I am more knowledgeable, I think I would be ill-advised to jump into that because I know that there are discussions that are going on with respect to that issue. And so, we'll see how that also develops in the coming months. But I certainly share your commitment to transparency whenever possible. And one of the things that I've done in my career is to do as much as I can to make documents available to Canadians, be it procedural documents, information packages, and so on. Outreach and transparency and bringing Canadians into Parliament has been a huge part of my career on the Hill, and I would certainly continue to make that outreach and transparency part of my commitment at the library.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I think that's a very fair response based on where we're at. I would ask if you could, at the appropriate time, maybe come back to the committee. Could be a written document as to just giving us the status of where that's at. Once discussions are concluded and whether there's a plan to move forward on it. So what the conclusion might be, just so that we don't lose that loop in terms of work that's already been started, work that was supposed to have been concluded, discussions that are happening now, so that we don't close, that we find a way to close that loop properly, if that's okay.
As you could probably imagine, since today I am just a nominee and I'm not in the position yet, I'm certainly reluctant to make any kind of commitment to bringing specific things back, but I have certainly made note of the committee's interest.
Okay, I appreciate that.
And thank you. No, thank you. We're going to have to go to the second round. No, I was, when we first started, I was allocating 3 minutes so that everyone would have had the time to ask a question, but we will put you on second round. So anyone else on first round who hasn't asked any questions? If not, we are going to the second round. So Mr. Saroya, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Lankin, you are very well qualified. Stuff look good here. Unfair to ask some question for tomorrow, but I'm going to ask anyway. If you can make some comments or you can come back, tell us in the future. From one library to a number of satellite libraries are coming up, 4 of them I understand. Do we have enough money for you to do what you need to do to be the best library in the country? Second, my personal suggestion, I come from the retails, the boutique shop. Sometimes we run out of the ideas when we want to give somebody something, some knickknacks or something. It's the same few things available. If we can expand it, I will gladly help out if I could bring my expertise into the thing. The third, the last meeting we heard the 3D library tours. I don't think it's done yet, and what is your ideas on it, and when can we see it, if anything is available? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. In terms of whether or not we have enough money, as you can imagine, I'm not in a position to say at this point whether we do or not. What I can assure you is that I will take the management of the budget of the library very seriously and ensure that it is one that is very soundly managed. And if there are needs, I will certainly bring those forward to your attention and, of course, to the attention of the speakers. And so once I'm more familiar with the details of the budget, that's something that I'll be able to come back on. In terms of the boutique, I noted that Ms. MacLeod, when she appeared with Madame Leroux at the last meeting, she talked about their having hired an expert in retail to really make the boutique more dynamic, get ideas for new products, and she had mentioned that the sales had increased significantly. And so it's certainly something that the current executive seems very conscious of and very committed to doing. So I think that will certainly continue. And it is an important part of the library, and it's certainly a wonderful thing to have the capacity to get different kinds of souvenirs for constituents and other visitors here. In terms of the 3D library tours, I know that Madame Leroux mentioned in her appearance that there were some time frames that they were hoping to be able to meet with respect to making various products available. And certainly one of the first things I will be asking for in my briefing, should I be confirmed in the position, is to find out, okay, where are we at with these different projects? What are the costs? What do we have to do to try to ensure that those deadlines are met? And how can I make these things happen? Because I see my role as being one to lead and inspire and bring the organization forward. And certainly these ideas sound very exciting, especially when Centre Block will be closed for some 10 years or so. Having these tours will be a wonderful tool, and so I will certainly be very interested in supporting those initiatives.
Thank you. Senator Iacono? No, Member of Parliament. Sorry.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Désolée.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No problem. Over the years, as you have worked on the Hill, you have acquired a lot of expertise in procedure and on the preparation and distribution of parliamentary documents. Since 1991, you have certainly used the services of the Library of Parliament, of course, yes? Of course. So my question is as follows, which might be a little easier for you to answer. And that is, are there services right now that are provided by the Library of Parliament that should be reviewed and made better suited for the work of parliamentarians today and in the future? So my question is really, based on your experience and your use of the services over the years, what do you think would be important to review and rethink? I believe as an innovative, effective institution, one has to always be rethinking how we do our work, looking at whether there are better ways of proceeding. So as a prospective librarian, I would look at how the Library of Parliament can rethink its services. And of course, the library is always reviewing how they do things. Right now, they are using increasing amounts of technology. We're going to have these satellite libraries. They are integrating new ways to access information. So in my new role, of course, I will want to get to know the various initiatives that have already been taken, see what the plans are for the new satellite libraries, and get feedback to see whether things are actually working with parliamentarians. Because it isn't for the parliamentary library itself, it's for you that things have to work properly. We need information from the users of the library, knowing that people work in different ways. You need information for your constituents. You need information to help you in your chambers. Some people like information on paper. Others want modern technology and the tools that go with it. So we have to be innovative. We have to be able to change the way we provide our services. In my 27 years on the Hill, I have seen many changes. And of course, there will be changes in 3, 5, or more years that I can't even anticipate now. So we need agile, flexible teams. Thank you.
I note with interest that the Library of Parliament manages the Parliamentary Tours program and also the boutique, yes. I have been coming to to Parliament Hill and doing the tours for over 20 years. And I always, whenever I leave, I always think, I wish I could know more, because I have such great interest and there's so much history here. And I would love, I don't know what's part of, I know there's a strategic plan for the next 5 years, and I'm not quite sure if looking at the tours and what's included and looking at it from different perspectives might be part of it, but I would encourage that it would be part of that. And the other thing in terms of the boutique, I would love to buy everybody something from that boutique. And to me, there's such opportunity and potential there to actually get great Canadian artists even to help us reimagine what some of those elements might be. You know, you have, just taking lessons from some private sector companies, they bring in sort of, Stella McCartney comes into H&M and does sort of like, for 1 year, does some really cool stuff. We could do some of that with some of our Canadian artists and just be some innovative. So I just wanted to sort of ask whether you had any thoughts around the Parliamentary Tourism Boutique that you might want to be able to share with us.
Thank you very much for the question, and this is a perfect example of why having this committee in place is so great, because you have ideas that I can then take and think about and explore with my team, and we'll see, what comes of them. So in terms of the boutique, certainly, I mean, I will be open to ideas from members of the public, from parliamentarians, from any source, and that's a wonderful idea that I will take note of. In terms of the tours, I think it is such an incredible opportunity to really explain to Canadians and visitors from around the world what the Parliament of Canada is all about, the role of the Senate, the role of the House. I mean, we have so much to be proud of, and the tours are a fantastic opportunity to share that knowledge. One of the things that strikes me, and it's something that, it's just an idea for exploration, but I know from my experience in the Senate that one of the things that is most powerful for visitors is to actually have contact with an individual parliamentarian, a real person. And I know as much as 2D and 3D and technology is wonderful, and having virtual reality is wonderful, reality is even better than virtual reality. And one of the things I would love to see is there a way that, those 350,000 Canadians who come on tours or visitors, is there a way that they could have even a moment of time with any one of you or one of your colleagues, just so that when they go home, they have that memory of having come in contact with a parliamentarian who represents them here. And so I think it's not just about history, it's also about now. And I think there are all sorts of ways that we can think about those tours, and we can think about the boutique to be dynamic and creative and innovative. And I look forward to working with you and all parliamentarians to find ways to do that.
Great.
Thank you. Do you want to go on round 3?
That's okay.
Yes. Anyone else on round 2? Round 3, Mr. Saroya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the 2 comments. It's not fair to ask future questions. Couple of comments, as I said, coming from the retail side, more souvenirs we sell, sales go up, happy customers here, more employment and more souvenirs. Those souvenirs will grow our democracy. Those people sitting, the kids buying stuff, they'll be waiting for the age of 18 to come out and vote for us. It's yes, the sale was up, I believe 32% this year compared to last year, but we could do much better in my opinion. Second comment is you get confirmed today, you will have our 100% support. We will never tie your hands. Whatever you need to do, you can always count on us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Lang, would you have some closing comments for us?
Just for the opportunity to appear today. I cannot tell you what an honor it is to be considered for this position, and if I am confirmed in it, I look forward to working with all of you over the coming years. So thank you for your courtesy, your interest, and I will give you everything I've got to do a fantastic job should I be confirmed. So thank you. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone. Did you have one last question? We have one closing question.
Your new role, we would say when you take office, how do you intend to consult with parliamentarians, or do you intend to consult with parliamentarians? Do and how do you intend to consult with parliamentarians to guide them, to inform them on how you intend to run the Parliamentary Library and how they can benefit and make use of your new services. And one last thing, and how we can be more proactive in helping you making this place a lot more user-friendly and also open to us.
Well, certainly in terms of consultation with parliamentarians, as I mentioned, I think this committee is certainly one place for that. Until I have actually been fully briefed by the library in terms of what they're doing now to consult with parliamentarians, I'm not sure, and I certainly don't have a fully developed plan yet in how I would do it, but I do know that there are many, many avenues for those consultations, and it could be everything from, you know, a client survey to all parliamentarians saying, you know, are you satisfied, are you not, what can we do better? It can be face-to-face meetings. We know we have the Library Ambassador program where there are employees of the library who meet with individual parliamentarians to find out about the services of Parliament. Is that an avenue where they could bring back feedback how to improve, working through committee chairs and deputy chairs, and of course I would have regular contact with the speakers who will provide direction to me. And so I think that it would be a multifaceted approach, recognizing that different individuals have, first of all, different ways of liking to share feedback, and also recognizing you're all very, very busy people. You don't have a lot of time, and so is it a question of, you know, getting feedback when you're in one of the branches and finding out, did we meet your need? Did we not? Or was this document what you looked for? So I would look at a whole lot of different ways of doing it, but until I actually find out what's being done now, I don't think I'm as well based to make a final determination. This is just exploration at this point, but I can assure you the parliamentarians will be well consulted and they will know the services that we offer and they will continue to improve.
C'est bien. Alors, je vous remercie beaucoup.
I would like to thank you very much. Thank you for your remarks. I think everyone has had a possibility to answer your questions, so we wish you good luck and you will hear back from us quite quickly. Thank you. We will now adjourn for a few moments and then in about 5 minutes, we will resume. Thank you.
Thank you.